Hi Year 10, it's Mrs Truman here. I'm here to talk you through another key question. The key question that I'm going to be focusing on is, how does Shakespeare present the role of gender in the play? You can see I've highlighted two of the key words. What I'm going to look at with you is how. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the methods that Shakespeare uses, some of the structural methods and language methods that he uses. And I've also highlighted the keyword of gender, because obviously that's the theme that we're going to be addressing through this big question. Now, obviously both femininity and masculinity are represented in the play. I've just made some notes that femininity is represented quite obviously through Lady Macbeth and the witches, and that masculinity is represented through Macbeth, Lady Macbeth and Macduff, and that's what I'm kind of going to go into more detail with you now. Now, if we kind of look at masculinity as a whole, because to me masculinity is the driving force of the play. It is certainly something which supersedes femininity for a number of reasons, certainly because obviously masculinity was the more dominant gender at the time, but also because we actually do see it as something that is desired. It is linked closely to ambition. Again, I'm going to go into more detail, but we know that certainly Lady Macbeth desires to become more masculine. Macbeth loses his masculinity within the middle of the play, but then again he desires to gain that back, and he does. Now, for me, obviously, yes, it is something to be desired, but it's more something which is actually needed to achieve the goals which are achieved in the play, or certainly the characters think that they needed to achieve the goals that they want to achieve. And I think by presenting masculinity in the way that Shakespeare does, he's actually allowing us to question the fact of good versus evil. Because what we see in the play is that actually when masculinity is presented, violence will follow. And we certainly see that first of all in the opening of the play in Act 1. We see Macbeth demonstrating these warrior-like qualities. He's seen as violent, he's seen as brave, he's also seen as loyal by the king. And what it does show is that actually how important masculinity is, certainly on the battlefield. And what we also see through this is that yes, masculinity are stereotypical attributes of the era, and as I said, certainly on the battlefield, but it's also this idea that in order for violence to be demonstrated for good and bad, it is the masculine character that goes through with that, and it is the masculine character that therefore displays these violent traits. And that links closely with the idea of how important masculinity is to achieving goals, yes, on the battlefield, but yes, obviously in the other events which happen in the play. Now, that links very closely to this cynical structure, and I've underlined that because to me that is a key method that Shakespeare uses. Because like I've just mentioned, yes, we see these warrior-like qualities in Act 1 from Macbeth, and within the middle he does lose them. I'm going to go on to that next, but actually they do return towards the end of the play. To me, Macbeth's masculinity qualities actually return from Lady Macbeth's death, probably a little bit before, but certainly from that point, leading into Act 5, he then once again returns to his masculine-like ways, and we ultimately know that the outcome of that is that he then obviously battles with Macduff, and not a good outcome for Macbeth, but certainly for Macduff, which is why obviously I have mentioned in the opening here that Macduff also represents these masculine qualities. Now, what Shakespeare also does, he presents gender as something which is interchangeable. Like I've said earlier on, we know that Macbeth loses these masculine qualities, and it's not to say he necessarily becomes more feminine, but certainly within that era he certainly loses the masculine qualities that were expected of a man of that time. And that is because actually of the role of Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth, certainly within Act 2, begins to demonstrate more masculine qualities and ultimately manipulates Macbeth's manhood. She questions his masculinity. She uses such as adjectives such as coward, drunk and afeared, all these the words that wouldn't be stereotypical of a man of the era. She repeatedly questions what he was ultimately doing and how he's displaying himself, how he's portraying his masculinity. And in doing so, and belittling him in a way that she does, he loses a piece of his masculinity bit by bit. And I think that what Shakespeare was ultimately doing is actually showing the importance of gender and gender roles of the time, and because both these attributes which are being demonstrated by Macbeth and Lady Macbeth aren't actually stereotypical of that era, and I think that he's actually contradicting the gender roles, and it does make us question obviously which is the more powerful gender and therefore the more powerful sex. Now, I have already spoken about the importance of masculinity, or gender even, in achieving goals. And we know that obviously Macbeth achieves his goals on the battlefield. He achieves his goals of being king,